Jake, after 18 years, your position is being eliminated, my boss said coldly. Clear out your desk. Today's your last day. 18 years of loyalty ended in less than 60 seconds. No warnings, no explanations, just a locked door and a cardboard box. I am Jake Wilson, 54 years old, senior systems analyst at Meridian Technologies. 18 years of early mornings, late nights, and weekends where my kids grew up while I was fixing servers. 3 CEOs had come and gone. I trained every fresh-faced college grad who stumbled in wide-eyed and clueless. I never once asked for special treatment. And on a Monday morning, Rick Kavanaugh, the new VP, fresh suit, slick grin, called me into his office and stripped it all away. His words were clipped, efficient, like he was reading a grocery list. He didn't give me a reason, didn't offer a thank you, just said my time was over. Security was already waiting outside his office door, like they'd been briefed before I even sat down. 2 guards, not hostile, but not friendly either. They handed me a box and watched as I filled it with the remnants of almost 2 decades, photos of my kids, a coffee mug from my first year, a plaque from the CEO before Rick that said, "Outstanding dedication." That plaque felt heavier than the box itself. Walking out through the lobby, I kept my face neutral. No tears, no anger, no protest. Just the steady steps of a man carrying 18 years in his arms while his coworkers looked away. Some out of pity, some out of fear they'd be next. But inside I wasn't calm. Inside, something burned. Because I knew Meridian. I knew the systems, the budgets, the timelines, the skeletons in the data closet. You don't serve 18 years in one place without learning its pulse, its weaknesses, its secrets. And something about this didn't add up. Rick was too smug, too rehearsed. His dismissal wasn't bus, in S. It was personal. But what he didn't know was this. I'd always kept records. Every project plan, every budget discrepancy, every memo that got lost when convenient. 18 years of receipts. As the guards walked me out to the parking lot, the box digging into my arms, I kept my head down. To them, it probably looked like defeat. To Rick, it probably looked like silence. But silence isn't surrender. Silence is a pause, a breath before the strike. Rick thought he'd buried me under 18 years of silence. What he didn't know was that I'd kept every receipt. You can learn a lot about betrayal by studying patterns, and I'd spent my whole life studying systems. The more I replayed that Monday morning, the more I realized my firing hadn't started that day. The signs had been trickling in for months, like error codes that no one else bothered to read. Rick had been too interested in my old projects. He'd pop into my office, casual smile plastered on, asking me to walk him through legacy systems he had no business worrying about. Then came the nudges about documenting my processes, making sure others could pick things up if needed. At the time, I thought it was management fluff. Now I saw it for what it was. Groundwork. He wasn't preparing the team. He was preparing to erase me. Meetings started appearing on calendars that I wasn't invited to. Strategy sessions that should have included the man who built half the infrastructure they were discussing. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, but patterns don't lie. Rick needed me gone, not because I wasn't performing, but because I was standing in the way of something he didn't want me to see. And here's the thing about systems analysts, we never really forget. For 18 years, I'd kept archives, not company-issued backups, my own. A quiet weapon, hidden in plain sight, email trails long since deleted from the corporate servers, internal memos marked confidential that I'd saved in redundant folders, old budget drafts that didn't match the final numbers. Every discrepancy, every unexplained shift, every ghost in the system, I had it. Most men leave a job with a cardboard box. I left with a digital memory of Meridian Technologies spanning almost 2 decades. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the box from security still unopened by the door, and I pulled out my personal drives. One by one, they lit up on my laptop like silent witnesses. Files scrolled past, thousands of them. each one a fragment of truth the company thought had been buried. Rick thought he'd ended me in 60 seconds. What he didn't realize was that I'd been building insurance since the day I first clocked in. And if he wanted me gone, it meant he was afraid of what I knew. And that meant the evidence I had was worth far more than my job. I may have been fired, but my fingerprints were still on every corner of Meridian's systems. Late that night, my living room glowed with the cold light of my laptop. Stacks of drives and backup disks surrounded me like sentries. For years I'd mirrored critical logs, not because I distrusted the company, but because it was habit, a safety net. If a server went down, I always had the record to rebuild. Turns out that same habit was about to uncover something far more dangerous. I started small. Compliance logs, routine vendor reports, old billing statements. At first, everything looked clean, the way corporate paper trails are designed to look. But systems have patterns, and when a number breaks the rhythm, it's like static in a signal. You can't unhear. So one vendor had been paid twice in the same quarter. Odd, but maybe clerical. Another contract renewal showed a payment routed through an unfamiliar holding company. Then another, and another. Different names, different shells, but the same addresses tucked deep inside the fine print. I felt my pulse slow, not quicken. This wasn't chaos. This was a system. A hidden one. Someone had built a siphon inside Meridian's own billing, doubling payments, rerouting contracts, bleeding money into shadows. And the deeper I went, the more one truth became undeniable. All those phantom routes began the same year Rick Kavanaugh arrived. It wasn't random, it was orchestrated. I leaned back, staring at the glow of numbers and names. Suddenly, his interest in my old projects, his push for documentation, his obsession with getting me out of the loop, it all clicked. Rick didn't fire me because I was obsolete. He fired me because I was the only one who could see through the camouflage. The company thought my box of belongings was everything I carried out of Meridian. They didn't realize I'd walked away with a digital map of its veins, and now, those veins led directly to Rick's hands. I scrolled further, tracing one of the shadow accounts back through layers of proxies until I found it. A billing ID masked beneath 3 shell vendors, hidden inside the IT infrastructure budget. My budget, my domain. He thought he was safe burying it there, inside the labyrinth I had built. Rick thought firing me erased the trail. He never imagined I'd already archived it. Sometimes, revenge doesn't come alone. Sometimes, an ally appears where you least expect them. It was close to midnight when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice on the other end I knew. Sarah Klein, one of Meridian's accountants. Mid-level, diligent, the kind of employee who worked in shadows and made the numbers add up while executives like Rick took the credit. Her tone was cautious, like someone checking over her shoulder even as she spoke. She'd heard what happened to me, then she admitted something I hadn't expected. She'd been pushed aside too, not fired outright, but reassigned, stripped of responsibilities, and quietly excluded from meetings. And she had suspicions. The numbers hadn't been adding up for months. Vendor accounts that didn't match actual deliveries, budgets that ballooned without explanation. But whenever she tried to raise it, her access was cut. Reports vanished from her queue. Questions went unanswered. That's when I opened my laptop and showed her what I had. The digital logs, the ghost accounts buried inside IT billing, the phantom vendors all leading back to Rick's first year. Her silence on the line was heavier than any words. Then, slowly, she exhaled and said, "I knew it. Sarah had what I didn't. Internal financial records. Things my mirrored logs could hint at, but not confirm. Purchase orders, invoices, ledger adjustments that only someone inside finance would ever see. Where I had the digital skeleton, she had the muscle wrapped around it. We agreed to meet the next evening, off-site. Neutral ground. I brought drives. She brought ledgers. And when we started laying them side by side, the picture sharpened into something undeniable. Rick wasn't just skimming. He was siphoning at scale. Millions funneled through shells, disguised as IT overhead, padded into vendor contracts, And every cent came with Sarah's fingerprints too, whether she liked it or not. He hadn't just stolen from Meridian, he'd used us both as cover. That night, over cheap coffee in a quiet diner, we made an unspoken pact. Two discarded employees, bound not by loyalty to Meridian anymore, but by the truth we carried. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. Rick wasn't just stealing money. He was gambling with the entire company's future. Every strategy has its breaking point. Mine came the night Rick almost found me out. Sarah and I had been meticulous. Every evening after she left Meridian, she slipped copies of reports into a neutral drop. I'd layer them against my mirrored logs, cross-referencing every shell vendor, every duplicate payment. Slowly, we built a case that no board of directors could ignore. It felt airtight, unstoppable. Until my phone rang. Rick. His name lit up the screen like a tripwire. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told me not to. I answered. His tone was smooth, rehearsed, the kind of false warmth that hides a blade. He said he was reconsidering the terms of my departure. Maybe we could negotiate a severance package, something more generous, if I agreed to sit down with him. I didn't respond right away. Silence makes people nervous, and sure enough, he filled the gap. That's when the mask slipped. He told me he'd heard things, that I'd been digging where I shouldn't. The implication was clear. He knew I hadn't gone quietly. Then came the threat, wrapped in legal jargon. If I didn't sign an NDA, he'd pursue action. Breach of contract, misappropriation of data, corporate theft, words designed to intimidate, to make me forget that the only thief on the line was him. I kept my voice even, played dumb. Told him I had no idea what he was talking about, that I wasn't interested in meetings, NDAs, or anything else. He didn't like that. His tone sharpened, and I heard, just beneath the polish, the first flicker of fear. When the call ended, I sat in the dark with the phone still in my hand, my pulse finally catching up. For the first time, I felt the edge of panic. He was close. Too close. If Rick suspected, he'd start burying trails, shredding files, covering every digital footprint Sarah and I had uncovered. Months of quiet work could vanish in days. I knew then that we couldn't wait for the perfect strike. We had to move before Rick sealed the cracks shut. But as I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, desperate for a foothold, the system handed me one. A final card I hadn't realized I still held. For the first time, I felt the edge of panic. But then, the system gave me one last card to play. Machines don't forget, not if you know where to look. That night, with Rick's threats still echoing in my ear, I stared at the network map I'd carried in my head for nearly 2 decades. Meridian had grown, changed, reshaped itself under 3 different CEOs, but one truth never changed. Migrations are messy. No matter how clean the rollout, some fragments always remain behind. And then it hit me. 10 years back, I'd overseen a system migration to streamline vendor contracts. We'd spun up an off-site server for redundancy, a temporary vault for emails and invoices. It had been ordered to wipe it when the project was complete, but I was the one who'd built it. I knew the admin credentials, and something in me doubted it had ever truly been scrubbed. Hands steady, I tunneled in. At first the connection lagged, like waking a machine that hadn't breathed in years. Then the directories appeared, untouched, forgotten. I opened the first folder, archived email threads, vendor communications Rick never expected anyone to see again, promises of inflated invoices, reassurances that the overages would be routed to shell accounts. My stomach tightened as I scrolled further, names, dates, payments, all signed off under Rick's authority. Then came the real grenade, a thread buried deep, flagged internal only. It was Rick, writing to a select few vendors. He wasn't just siphoning money, he was laying groundwork, talking about financial irregularities, errors in IT billing, and how they might trace back to Wilson. Me. I froze, staring at my name in black and white. He hadn't just cut me loose, he'd planned to bury me as the scapegoat. Every dollar missing, every shell company, every padded contract. He'd intended to pin it all on the man who built the systems, on me. For a moment, rage threatened to take over, but then the analyst in me, the man who'd spent a lifetime reading patterns, took control. This wasn't the end. This was the final piece. Fraud was one thing. Conspiracy to frame an employee was another. Rick hadn't just stolen from Meridian. He'd tried to erase me with the same keystrokes. And now I had it. Proof not only of theft, but of intent. The man who thought he'd erased me had left his fingerprints all over a forgotten machine. Justice isn't about shouting. It's about timing the silence until the right moment. Sarah and I met again, this time in her garage with the door closed, 2 laptops glowing between us. The table was littered with coffee cups, printouts, and USB drives, each one a weapon sharper than any blade. Piece by piece, we built the dossier, vendor contracts padded beyond recognition, financial reports doctored in Rick's favor, mirrored logs showing the siphon he thought he'd buried, and finally, the emails. His emails. Proof he wasn't just stealing, but plotting to pin the blame on me. By the time the folder was complete, it was heavy enough to crush a man's career. We both knew better than to hand it to HR. Rick had his claws in middle management, and HR existed to protect executives, not expose them. Going up the chain would only warn him. So we aimed higher. Straight at the board of directors, the only group with the power to cut him loose. I encrypted everything with keys I'd written years ago, back when Meridian still trusted me to guard its infrastructure. A quiet irony, the same system Rick thought he'd stolen from me would now be the noose around his neck. The email was simple. No preamble, no grand accusations, just the dossier attached, labeled with dates, accounts, and a line that said, "Review carefully. The truth is in the logs." We sent it anonymously, routed through mirrored backups and offshore relays. When it left my laptop, I sat back in the silence, listening to the hum of the hard drive as though it were a heartbeat. Sarah looked at me, eyes sharp but tired. "Now what?" she asked. "Now," I said. "We wait." And that was the hardest part. For days, the silence pressed heavier than any gunfire I'd ever known. I imagined Rick in his office, smug as ever, unaware of the storm quietly circling him. I imagined the board members opening that encrypted dossier, seeing his fingerprints on every fraudulent contract, every shell vendor, every plan to scapegoat me. Justice doesn't roar, it waits, and when it strikes, it leaves nothing standing. The next board meeting was scheduled for Friday. By Monday, Rick would learn what silence feels like. Powerful men don't crumble all at once. They crack, one denial at a time. The board met behind closed doors that Friday. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I'd spent years watching how executives handled crises, and I knew exactly how Rick would play it. At first, denial. Calm, measured, the tone of a man too important to be questioned. He'd tell them the contracts were routine, the vendors legitimate, the payments a necessary part of growth strategy. But numbers don't lie. And when the board laid out duplicate invoices, shell company addresses, and the emails he thought were long gone, the first crack appeared. Rick's voice sharpened, his explanate. Ions rushed. He tried to shift the blame. Clerical errors, rogue staff, even legacy systems left behind by me. That's when Sarah's records came in. Clean, precise, undeniable. She'd flagged anomalies months before, proof that Rick had overridden her corrections, scrubbed her reports, silenced her access. With her ledgers laid next to my mirrored logs, the picture was complete. This wasn't negligence. It was embezzlement. The vendors were implicated too. Payments traced, accounts frozen. Auditors were summoned on the spot, their arrival cutting through Rick's last defenses like a blade. And then came the silence, the moment every man in power dreads, when the room stops believing him. I imagined the sweat on his collar, the shuffle of papers as he realized his empire had turned to ash. When security entered, I wondered if he thought back to the morning he'd had me escorted out. Same walk, same humiliation. Only now it was his name being stripped from the directory. They marched him out past his own assistants, who kept their eyes down the way mine once had. Boxes waited for him, the same kind of cardboard coffin they'd handed me. The cycle had closed. I wasn't there to see his face, but I didn't need to. The image was burned in my mind already. Rick, The man who thought he'd buried me, walking out under the same shadow he'd cast over me. But while Rick's fall was satisfying, it wasn't the end. Because the board still had one question, whispered behind closed doors, hanging over the wreckage of Rick's career. Who saved them from collapse? Revenge doesn't always mean taking back what was stolen. Sometimes it means leaving quietly, with dignity intact. The board reached out the following week. Their tone was different now, cautious, respectful, like men who had just watched one of their own implode and were afraid the fire might spread. They offered me reinstatement, same office, same title, even whispers of back pay. I turned it down. Meridian wasn't mine anymore. The walls were soaked in betrayal, and I had no interest in rebuilding a career inside a company that had stood silent while Rick gutted it. My peace didn't lie in going back. It lay in walking away. What I did accept was something cleaner, quieter, a discreet consulting payout, officially for data recovery assistance. Unofficially, it was payment for saving their empire from collapse, enough to put my kids through school, enough to buy me freedom from boardrooms and midnight server alarms. I left them stronger than they deserved, and I took with me only what mattered. My time, finally, my own. Sarah stayed. She didn't just survive, she rose. With Rick gone and the financial team in shambles, the board needed someone they could trust, and they chose her. The woman Rick had sidelined became the woman who held the numbers together. Watching her step into the role she'd earned was its own kind of justice. As for Rick, his fall didn't stop at the door. The auditors he mocked became investigators. The vendors he colluded with became liabilities. Soon his name was whispered in the same breath as indictments and blacklists. Every company in the industry closed their doors to him. The man who once strutted through hallways with a smirk couldn't buy his way into another job. And me? I walked in silence. No he. Ad lines, no speeches, no parade of vindication. Just mornings where I woke without dread, nights where I closed my laptop knowing no one could ever erase me again. Looking back, the irony was sharp enough to taste. Rick thought loyalty made me weak. He thought firing me erased 18 years of memory, 18 years of patterns and receipts. But loyalty had made me patient, and patience had made me dangerous. 18 years of loyalty ended with betrayal. But in the end, it wasn't me who lost everything. It was the man who thought loyalty made me weak.